Hey, and welcome to Worlds Collide, how Pardot and Salesforce automation work in tandem for amazing results. I'm Mike Fazio. I'm the VP of Operations at Sercante, um, and I appreciate your time here in the next 40 or so minutes. So it seems like a lot of teams purchase Pardot and use it as an email tool, which is fine. But that's sort of like saying Salesforce is just a spreadsheet, an expensive spreadsheet. The power in Pardot is in automating marketing processes, just like the power in Salesforce is in automating sales processes. And I feel that the automation in general is the heart of digital transformation. And so these two tools, while great separately, together you can take your marketing and your sales automation to new exciting places. So as this quote that I found on the internet says, come, let us have some tea and continue to talk about happy things. Let's go. What we're going to talk about today, I broke up into three main sections. The first are the fundamentals and the features of each platform, and that we'll be using later in the presentation. So this is to get us familiar with the concepts that we'll be using for some of our more exciting things in the expanding section. And in the expanding section, I'm going to look through some examples of things that maybe you've thought about or things that you probably haven't thought about and how to use Salesforce and Pardot together. And then finally, because of the power in this automation, you could potentially cause a lot of damage, right? And we don't want that. So I have a few places for us to slow down, take a look through, and make sure that we are just being mindful of the power that is in front of us. Also, one note, I'm going to be using Salesforce sort of liberally to mean Sales Cloud, Salesforce platform, or even Service Cloud. I just want to keep it simple. I think I use Sales Cloud later on in the presentation, but that's sort of just the generic term that I'll be using most of the time. All right, well, let's get into it, and let's actually figure out or take a look at the features of each of the platforms and the ones specifically that we'll be using in our examples later on. If you happen to be an expert in Salesforce and or Pardot, these will be a good review for you, but probably nothing new. Starting with Pardot, what are the pieces? What are we looking at here, right? Pardot has a number of automations. It has a number of different ways for us to interact with prospects and take actions. And these are the main tools here, which we will run through. And we'll touch on each of these individually in the next couple of slides. First one that I want to look at is Engagement Studio. Engagement Studio is the most flexible of the tools, most extensible, and is the closest to Flow in Salesforce. Almost all of Pardot functionality can be summoned by Engagement Studio programs. You start with a list. You start with lists of prospects, suppression lists of prospects you don't want to get in there. You drop in your logic, your actions, and you build whatever. You can build small things. You can build big things. Complicated, simple. The sky's kind of the limit there. The big gap in engagement programs is it's hard to or impossible to really manipulate data in fields. Things change, they keep adding functionality, but generally I can't say make X, copy this data into this field, things like that you would expect from a Salesforce automation. This is also kind of a recurring theme in Pardot. Pardot doesn't have this sort of idea of copying data into fields. There are places where you can change data, and certainly with list imports and form fills, prospect data can be updated, but it really isn't the main focus of what Pardot can do. The next one I want to look at here are automation rules. Automation rules are sort of the workhorses of Pardot. They remind me of workflow rules in Salesforce, right? They're small, they're quick, they're powerful. You can do almost anything with them. And they're really a foundation, but they're not quite as interesting or put together, or you can't flow them together like you can in an Engagement Studio program. So I feel like just like Flow is getting more attention in the Salesforce platform, I feel like Engagement Studio is getting more attention in the Salesforce platform. And the interesting thing about automation rules, you'll see in the next couple of slides, is that this idea of automation rules are taken kind of taken apart and used in different parts of the platform. And those two main areas are the top here, where we see where there's rules. You can have complex logic that says, in this case, match any of these things in this rule group, which is, there's a certain custom field that has a certain data in it, and then also match this other set of data in the rule group. So is the prospect on any of these lists, right? In this case, it's looking to say, is either of these two prospect fields have this data, this certain data, and does the prospect exist on any of these lists? And these rules can dig into account data and opportunity data, custom object data. You can really go crazy with the rules that are in here. And the actions the same way. The actions let you do any number of things in Pardot, like send a autoresponder email, or send notifications to sales, create tasks, add or remove lists, campaigns, update. You can update data in a certain sense on some fields on the prospect record with this. So they're really powerful tools. You can get into some trouble if you have too many of them that are running frequently on big sets of data. Just like anything else, pay attention to what you're doing. Try to keep the load light on your system. So the next one here we're going to look at is completion actions and page actions. These answer the question, what do we need to do immediately after a prospect interacts with us? Interactions from a prospect can be form fills, web page visits, link clicks, things like that, right? And the actions that come off, the actions that you are defining are the same ones as the automation rules, right? The difference is that these actions are confined to the specific asset. So in this one form fill, I want everyone to get added to this campaign and to create a task for the assigned user, and maybe assign it to a user or a queue, right? And it's just for that form, or just for this page action. Whereas an automation rule can run across forms, across page actions, right? In an automation rule, I can say, if anyone fills out any form, do this action, right? It's just sort of the big thing. So it's sort of like taking the body of the automation rule and sticking it into completion actions of forms and form handlers and page actions and dynamic not dynamic content, the custom redirects. Can't forget about custom redirects. All right. And the last one here that we're going to really dig into is static and dynamic lists. I mean, lists are lists. It's a group of prospects that you put together and you want to take some action on, or you just want to track where they've been, what they've done. Static lists are static, meaning that they are a bucket, and you use other automations and list imports, things like that, and you stick prospects into the bucket, or you remove prospects out of the bucket. A dynamic list, on the other hand, takes the brains of the automation rule, the rules part, and it pulls in or pushes out prospects, right? So in this case, we're looking to see if any prospect is not assigned, and to see if it's a lead or a contact type, right? So this is basically looking for a certain error situation in Pardot where Pardot doesn't have a user that it should have in the system, right? And we'll talk about users later on. And then finally, one sort of call out to mention here is the Pardot API. Because it is such a powerful tool and it is continuing to grow better and more mature, you can do a lot with it. They're giving you a lot more functionality as we go forward, right? Right now, you can do a lot with pulling prospect data, pushing prospect data. You can send emails through the API. You can do some other cool things like that. There's more things. Layout templates for landing pages and forms. But there's even more of that coming, right, in the roadmap of Pardot. I don't have any safe harbor messages here, except that there's cool stuff that I know is on the horizon for the API. It is also very powerful, can be confusing for non-developers. If you want to dig in, I dropped my my Twitter handle there again. Please reach out with questions, and I'll help however I can. All right, so now I think we want to jump into the other platform, being Salesforce. So I intentionally put playing with data because of what I mentioned before with Pardot's Pardot being weak on manipulating data, right? Like it is very the concept of taking data from different places and combining it together, or doing like math, things like that that you would expect that you can do in Salesforce. You just can't do inside of Pardot. And also Salesforce, Pardot doesn't allow you to write to accounts or opportunities, right? The only objects that Pardot can write to are leads and contacts through their prospects. So there's a lot there that we can't do in Pardot, but we can do in Salesforce. So the parts that we want to talk about here, you see on the slide, and we'll go through each of these just like we do with our Pardot tools. And again, this is not meant to be a really technical deep dive of each of these tools. We just want to know that what's available to us. So the first one is Flow. I love Flow. This is not the newest, prettiest version that you will auto lay things out, very similar to an Engagement Studio program, but it's powerful. I mean, it's the closest thing you can get to Apex without putting your hands, getting knee deep or eyeball deep into code. And Apex has its uses, but really Flow is for that, advanced admin who wants to get in and do things, or even, newer admins who are to like make a more simple flow to make things happen, which is really the power in Flow. You can manipulate data, you can create records, delete records. The sky really is the limit. I said that for Engagement Studio programs, but Flow is even more so. The next thing here will just a quick nod to workflow rules and process builder. I know Salesforce is not doing away with them, but they're just talking about them less and pushing people more towards Flow because of how flexible and powerful it really is. There's some other things on bulkification and making sure that you're avoiding processor limits and things like that. That Flow can help you do more than process builder. We'll talk about that in a different topic, but just to mention that they do still exist. I do use them in some of the examples further later on. You can pretty much do everything you want in Flow without these two. I still think they have a place in the org. And then finally, Apex. As far as automations go, build what you want. I mean, this is a really cool part of the platform. If you have a strong developer available to you, you can make Salesforce do what you want it to do. I also really like the newer JavaScript development platform, forgetting the name right now, that really helps extend Lightning into some really cool ways. But we're not going to get too much. We're not going to really get into that today. But the power and possibilities there. And then the last part about Salesforce that I will mention here is standard and custom objects. I mean, where would we put our data without them, right? I'm also putting in here external data sources because it's important to know that all of this sort of plays together, right? You've got internal data to Salesforce you might have in ERP or some other system that's pushing and pulling data in and out of Salesforce. Like, it's all part of this data pool that we need to take in consideration. So with that, now that we've seen Pardot and Salesforce and the individual tools inside of there, let's put them together and see what fun we can have. And as we do that, it's each platform, like clearly there's a lot to talk about in each of those features that we just looked into. And it's awesome that each platform can do their own thing, but we want more than good. What we want is amazing. So let's go as another Mike on my team says, let's go chase amazing. Let's see what we can do. This is the first list of what we're going to look at here are more standard functionality, things that happen mostly out of the box, right? Get Pardot stood up inside of a Salesforce instance, and most of these things work, right? There's a few things here and there, and that's why, there's partners and install docs, but this is to showcase what the immediate benefits are of the two systems together, knowing that we'll jump into some more hacky solutions later on. The first thing I want to talk about with standard functionality here is segmentation. One of the most, I guess, useful things in that immediately you get is the fact that I can now build an audience based off of what is happening with Salesforce data, right? Sales can communicate to marketing in a number of ways, right? Changing a lead status or a contact status, adding a contact to an opportunity, making an opportunity close lost, right? There's all manner of different data changes inside of Salesforce that will get pushed to Pardot and change who ends up on a segmentation list for us to email or send into an engagement studio program, right? There's a lot of power in that connection, that data connection. I will note that the little asterisk on the screen here is to say that Pardot can only write to prospect fields. It cannot write to account, opportunity, or custom objects. They're read only. So you can get the data, you just can't change it in Pardot. The next part here is connected campaigns. So this one has a little bit of history to it. Newer users in the past, I guess it's probably 2 or 3 years, don't really understand why there's this thing called connected campaigns. Essentially, before they were 2 separate things. Pardot had their own campaigns. Salesforce had their campaigns, and you had to just make a bunch of duplicate campaigns, and that was silly. Now it's all one, right? It all sort of lives inside of Salesforce. The nice thing about having campaigns and having them so tightly connected between the two is for, obviously tracking prospect activity, right? So prospects come in and they fill out a form, I can add them to a campaign, or they come in through a list import, I can add them to a campaign. And therefore in Salesforce, sales teams can see what's going on, who's part of campaigns. There's also some things with reporting later on that we'll see that have to do with campaigns. But the cool thing too is that Salesforce is also using this connected campaigns idea to pull in more data from campaigns. From assets in Pardot, which again we'll see when we talk more about reporting. You're getting more data that you would only see in Pardot is now getting pulled to Salesforce because of this connection. Another one which I think is actually really cool, and I don't know how many people off the bat think about it. It took me a while to really get it in my head, and I've been at this for 6 or so years in Pardot, and I guess a lot more in Salesforce. But the idea that I can use Pardot to create a task in Salesforce, which essentially opens up communication vehicles with sales, right? I want to make sure that important prospect activities aren't lost. I want to, agree on with my sales team, hey, when someone does X, there needs to be a human follow-up. There needs to be a human action. How do I get that human action to the humans? And that's through a task. And I find that it's a really powerful thing. And we'll see how we automate some task creation later on. But I really do like the idea of prospect does something interesting. Let's get a task so the sales can see it, act on it, not lose it, because that task will show up as, show black for the future and then red when it's passed, and shows up on reports and all that kind of stuff for some accountability if we need to. So tasks. The next one here is scoring and grading. Scoring and grading is typically thought of as a marketing thing, right? Oh, I get a score and I go from like a prospect to an MQL, and then there's all these terms. That's cool. But what I really like about it in Salesforce perspective is, as a sales team, I want to pay attention to the best types of leads and the most active leads. And that's where I'm really using Pardot score and Pardot grade. I want to use it in a list view, right? So I can sort to see the grades in this view right now are pretty bad, C minus and D, which means I'm not doing a lot of grading, but that's what you get with a test environment. But I want to look and see, okay, where are all of my A grades and how active have they been? So I have a high score, an A grade. I'm going to call that person and see what's going on, right? Especially if I have a lot of things to get through that day. Who haven't I reached out to? Who's been active? Like, or new leads that come in. I have a new lead. One has a score of 200, one has a score of 50. They're both A's. I'm going with a 200 because that person is all over our stuff, right? So it's a way to communicate the sales, make sure we're focused on the right things together. And then finally, the last part here is user sync and sending from users. I really like this idea of sending from users in Pardot, right? So I can send an email that looks like it's coming from the account rep. So the account rep may have just had a phone call, and then a few days later, automatic email from Pardot fires off and it looks like it's coming from that person. That's a really powerful tool. You can do it with assigned user, so the person who actually the person in Salesforce who owns that particular lead or contact, or if it's a contact, you can send it from the account owner. So in more like account teams, things like that, you might have someone who owns the contact, but someone who owns the account, and you want the account owner to be the sender of the email because they're more of the central salesperson that we want their face out in front of them. The other one is a custom user, right? Not everybody has a very straightforward sales process. You know, there might be a manager's involved somewhere, owns an account, things like that. In that case, we have this idea of a prospect CRM user custom field, which is a really simple way of putting things. But essentially, it's a custom field on the prospect, so a lead or a contact, and that is a lookup field to the user object. With that, I'm able to essentially put whatever user I want on the lead or contact and send an email from that person. The requirement for that is making sure we have the right users in Pardot and in Salesforce. Salesforce has just recently enforced essentially SSO, single sign-on for Pardot, so there's no idea of just a Pardot-only user, which is really good. They're also making this user sync and manage users a lot easier and a lot more robust inside of Salesforce. So now I can make sure that I'm assigning all of the salespeople and all of the other users that I need in Pardot. It's real simple for me to just grab a profile, grab a group of users, things like that, get them into Pardot. So I can do interesting things like this. Okay, so those are fundamentals, not necessarily the most exciting, useful, but not exciting. So let's keep going. On to something exciting. Everyone loves reporting, or at least needs it, or gets asked to create it. Whatever it is, we're talking about it. So in Pardot, there's the marketing metrics you can get, which are okay. You know, you can quickly devolve into what we call vanity metrics, like, oh, great, I had a bunch of opens on my emails. Like, okay, well, yes, that's part of the puzzle. And then, you get a bunch of, clicks, unique clicks, have a high click-through rate. Yeah, those are all good signs that things are happening. But like, it ends there, and it feels like marketing is sort of just pumping themselves up and saying, yay, we sent emails. But there's something more to it, right? On the flip side, in Salesforce, you can see campaign membership, which is cool. Like, I can see people who put on there, and I can see opportunity data. I can run some reports and see what the revenue is. And typically, when you show an executive a revenue report, they're much more excited than seeing a clicks report. But in the right context, either way. But what happens if we take those two concepts and we like smush them together, right? That's where we get attribution models. And this is like the holy grail of marketing metrics, right? It's how is marketing affecting the bottom line of revenue, and how can we then use that data to know where marketing is most effective in helping sales to get more deals and to close them faster and for more money, right? Once we have this connection, we can see a fuller picture of how these teams can work together for success, right? These are using the campaign influence models that come from natively in Salesforce and are enabled when you purchase Pardot. It may be a certain level of Pardot. I don't remember. Don't quote me on that one, but they are available. So you get these first touch, last touch, and even touch attribution models, which are pulled in to pull us together. So how do we do it? How do we get there? Essentially, we have to connect the dots, right? We take so on the Pardot side, when a prospect does something like visits a website, attends an event, responds to an email, things like that, we can put those activities into campaigns as campaign members. And then on the other side, sales is doing their thing with opportunities, and they're also using on those opportunities. Ideally, the sales team is adding contacts as opportunity contact roles on those opportunities. So I know, hey, I'm working with these 5 people on this opportunity from this account. When that happens, what Salesforce does is it uses the contact as the connection between your campaigns and your opportunities. And it says, from a first touch standpoint, right, the model looks and says, what was the first campaign that this person, that this contact interacted with, was a campaign member, within a certain time frame, who's also part of this opportunity. So now we're able to say campaign A was influential to opportunity A, right? And then it does the same thing for last touch and even touch. Even touch, it takes all the campaigns within a certain time frame and says, okay, well, the contact was part of these 5 campaigns. So each of these campaigns gets 20% of the revenue share, essentially, for these opportunities, and it smashes it all together, and that's when you get your attribution models, which is very cool. Sorry for jumping too ahead here, but the bonus part about this connection is what I mentioned previously. With connected campaigns, we're also getting more Pardot data in the campaign in Salesforce itself. So now I can do things like get email opens, email open and click data, form submission data, landing page views and submissions, all in these campaigns inside of a Salesforce report on the campaign record itself, or even in list views for the campaigns, right? So there's a lot more data coming in, and I expect more to continue to come in as the 2 platforms continue to kind of merge together. Okay, let's move on to more hacky things, because those are exciting. And hopefully you think this next section is as cool as I do. But if not, I mean, you're here, so let's at least see if we can give you some motivation or spark some ideas. Sorry about that. Just trying to break my desk here. So the first one I want to jump into here is inviting tiers of prospects to an event. We had a customer come to us and say, hey, we put on these events. We have different tiers of people that we want to send things out to. It could be 3, it could be 12. We don't, it depends on the event, right? And essentially, we want to be able to control this from Salesforce wherever possible, because it's like our sales team who's doing the invitations, and we want to be able to kind of add people when we have conversations, things like that, kind of make it really dynamic. So we don't know, we won't be able to know what child campaign a prospect might be in at any one time. And there could be dozens of child campaigns. And in that, we need to update the status, right? We need to change things around. And unfortunately, in Pardot, it sort of looks like this, right? It's going to be a mess, right? We racked our brain trying to figure out how to make it more simple, because people would be opting out of certain things, but only for that one program. We have to change statuses, make sure that the sales team knew that they opted out and weren't just kind of waiting, so they would stop following up. All these sort of interacting pieces, and it was like, this is just not what we wanted. We're not doing that. So we took a step back. So, okay, how do we use these 2 tools together? So what we do the first part of this is we want to start sending emails, right? So we have an engagement program that is set up to send a series of emails, wait and see if they've clicked anything or if they've opened it, whatever. And that's all started by adding a lead or a contact to a child campaign in Salesforce with a status of invite. So, hey, I want to invite this person. That gets synced to Pardot. Pardot says, oh yeah, I can invite you to this event, sure. And the email goes out. Well, prospect gets the email, says, I can't make it to this event, maybe next time, right? Hits the button. That button is a custom redirect in Pardot. And essentially what it does is it adds that person to the parent campaign, right? Because there's one parent campaign for each event, right? And we can handle that. We can handle one campaign for each event as opposed to dozens per event. So it adds that person to the parent campaign with a status of declined. It also puts them on a list because we want to just track what's happening. Now enters Apex, right? So we're getting into Sales Cloud, we're getting into the heavy stuff now. We could probably do this with a flow. In this case, Apex was just a quicker, more robust solution for what we were trying to do. So the Apex code doesn't care what campaign we're working with. So it's one Apex class for every campaign now and in the future. It's completely scalable. And so what the Apex does is it notices that the prospect is being added to a parent campaign. It says, okay, I know what to do when a child is added to a parent campaign with a declined status. So it grabs that prospect record or the lead or contact, and it finds that lead or contact in the correct child campaign, right? So I might be in child campaign C. When my record is added to the parent campaign, the Apex says, okay, I'm going to look for Mike. Mike is in child campaign C. I'm now, the Apex anyway, Apex will now change my status in the child campaign to decline, remove me from the parent campaign because we don't want prospects in there. We don't want leads or contacts in the parent campaign. It just confuses reporting. It also will make sure that I don't have a duplicate record in any of the other campaigns. If so, I'll deal with it. We'll remove it out of the wrong campaign, child campaign. And once it makes that change, right? So it changes my lead or contact, my campaign member status to declined. Pardot picks it up and says, whoa, okay, we're done. We'll stop sending emails about this, right? Pulls them out and we're done, right? So essentially in a small class, we are able to take what would have been a very complex series of automations in Pardot that we'd have to build for every single campaign they want to send out. Now we have one class that handles all the campaigns for this situation. So the next one we're going to look at here is capturing form submissions as tasks, right? One of the things that we get in, one of the questions we get for Pardot a fair amount is, well, like, how do you know when someone submits X data today and then submit something different in a few days, right? Because what happens in Pardot is when I submit a form, when a prospect submits a form, that data overwrites the prospect record data, right? There's no concept of a form submission being saved really anywhere. Some of the fields might get saved when you send out an email alert to like a sales rep as a completion action on that form, but it's not stored in the database anywhere. So how do we do that? How do we keep a record of those form submissions? And we do it by smashing the platforms together. So in this particular example, we have a form handler, which is essentially like a headless form, right? So I can use Gravity Forms or other forms, custom forms, whatever I want to send data into my form handler. And in this case, a prospect fills out a form and says, hey, I want a quote request for X, right? here's all my data, right? Date of birth, spouse, things like that. When they submit that form, that would be fine for one, but if they submit a form tomorrow, I still need to know the details of that quote request from yesterday. So what we do is the form handler comes in, and you see that what we're doing here on these two, on the two completion actions with the green arrows, those completion actions are changing the field value for essentially two fields that we're using as triggers, right? We're saying, hey, Salesforce, create this task, and here's the task. Here's the type of task that I want you to create, right? Those are the two field values that Salesforce is looking for. On the Salesforce side, we have a process builder. A process builder is looking for those two fields to change. And it says, okay, looks like my trigger is marked as true, so I need to do something. And then my name, the form that I need to do something with is called quote request, right? So it pulls those in and it starts to do something, right? In this case, what it's doing is it's taking the current data from the prospect record. So the prospect record was updated at the same time that this starts. So prospect record data is pulled into Salesforce as a lead in this case. The lead, the process builder takes that lead data. So you see there's a bunch of fields here, takes the current state of that data and copies it into a new task, right? So I know as of today, when this person filled out a form, I know what they put their date of birth as, the dollar amount of the quote that they wanted, their current email address, their spouse's information, like that, all that stuff that could be dynamic is now locked in as a task, right? So Pardot or Salesforce Process Builder copies the data into a task, and now that task is forever stored as essentially a form submission, right? A little hacky, not perfect. If you have somebody fill out forms really, really quickly, you might not capture all of that data, right? By the time Pardot syncs it over to Salesforce, the data might have already changed. You're taking a little bit of risk there. Most of the time, it probably will work out. Now, once Salesforce creates that task, we then have a wait step. And the wait step, we'll get into a little bit later why this is important, but there's a wait step that then sends data back to Pardot in about an hour, or I think it's actually a little bit less. That says, okay, Pardot, we created the task, stop asking us to create more tasks, right? For this one form submission, right? So kind of resets those fields, and now Pardot and Salesforce stop making tasks until that prospect fills out another form, another quote request. And now we have our task, right? And we can go in and see, hey, this is a quote request. I think this is actually an open task, probably gets assigned to someone to follow up on. All right, so I mentioned just in this last slide here that there's a reason why we had this wait step, and that gets into, like, we are doing some things that could break systems, right? You can corrupt data. You can, in the case of that task example, you can continue creating tasks over and over and over again and wonder what the heck is going on, right? There's ways that you can get into trouble here. So we want to take a few minutes, step back, look at some of these areas, and just make sure we're being mindful of what we're doing. Some of the things to look out for. We'll dig into each of these in the next few slides here. It's not like there's a ton. It's not like this is something you should not do. If you can test in a sandbox, the nice thing, we have Salesforce and Pardot sandboxes now, again, with a certain level of Pardot and Salesforce licenses. But let's, just a few things to kind of keep top of mind when you're getting a little hacky and trying to really extend the use of these platforms. One thing is we want to be careful of sync errors. 10,000 sync errors is not great. This was from an actual org. It's now down to, I think, a couple dozen. It was mostly some Salesforce errors, things like that, which you'll see here. Field integrity problems, making sure state and country are correct. It looks like there's a flow that was triggered and it failed for some reason. We have a field length problem and also dreaded DML errors, right? So the biggest problem with this org was there was a lot going on in Salesforce, and Pardot had a lot going on also. So we'd have a big data change in Pardot. It would try to send it to Salesforce, and Salesforce just would choke. It would just, I can't do it. So the whole batch fails, right? Pardot grabs a batch of, I think it's like 50. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that, but a batch of changes and says, Salesforce, please make these changes. And if any one of those fails, it fails the whole batch, right? So it just keeps failing and failing and failing, and the sync queue gets backed up, the sync errors get bigger, it becomes a big mess. So we want to really pay attention to our sync errors. It's something that you want to do at least once a week in a bigger org, probably every day. Come in the morning, make sure you don't have a bunch of new sync errors you weren't expecting. Every time there's a big change in your processes in Salesforce Pardot, check your sync errors. It's a house cleaning item that you need to do. And then if you remember a few slides back, I mentioned that the wait time is important. Well, now's the time to remember. Essentially, what can happen is if we were to have made this change, so we're looking at two fields in Pardot that tell Salesforce to create a task. If at the same time that we create the task, we flip those two fields back to say, okay, we're done, that change never gets back to Pardot. And I'll explain why here. For anyone who's really familiar with the record transaction process, this is a very high level version of what happens. So don't at me later. But basically what's happening is the Pardot record is coming over and saying, okay, Salesforce, start this lead record update, right? The transaction. I want to update my lead with these fields and these two special fields that tell Salesforce to create a task and what task to create. So what happens then is as we, the transaction starts, the transaction goes down, Salesforce Process Builder notices, oh, there was a change. Oh, that was a change that I need to do something with. So it does, it creates the task like we told it to, no problem. But then it changes those two fields back, right? So now the two fields say false, basically don't create tasks, any more tasks. And then the record is updated. And that all happens in the same transaction. So it's all, so Pardot makes changes, Salesforce makes changes, and then it's written to the record. The problem is Pardot never gets that last Salesforce change back, right? If you get lucky, something else will change on the record later and it'll get to sit to Pardot. If you're not, and what we noticed was something else will change in Pardot, which will essentially force the data, will essentially tell Pardot, hey, your data is more up to date than Salesforce, even though it's not, and it will overwrite those changes and essentially cause Salesforce to make a new task, right? And this can happen over and over and over again. So when we add in the wait step, what happens is Pardot sends over the initial, hey, please create this task. Salesforce goes in, makes the task, and then puts in a wait step. And the wait transaction is called a paused interview. That goes out and just waits, hangs out, and allows the transaction to complete. So right now in Salesforce, the lead record still says, create this task, right? And then a few minutes later, a new transaction is started, lead record update transaction is started. And that's when Salesforce is able to make its changes. So it makes the changes and says, okay, stop making tasks now, changes the field, and those changes are able to be sent over to Pardot. Might have been confusing, tried to make it simple. We can talk about it later on Twitter if you want. And then the last one that I want to dig into here is you have to communicate. Like, I don't want to build any automation that makes my sales team look stupid, right? If they're making phone calls and sending emails, I don't want to also send emails pretending to be that person or pretending, or even emails that make it seem like I don't know what's going on, right? Like, we as a team need to communicate. I mean, that's it. Quick wrap up of what we talked about. So we looked at the worlds apart and the fundamentals and how doing things separately is okay. We're doing some good stuff. We looked at what happens when we slam them together and do really cool things, some out of the box and some hacky. And then the last one is we are playing with fire, right? You have to be careful. You want to watch out for errors. You want to pay attention to what's happening, test things, communicate well, and be willing to give it a shot, see what happens. And that's all I have for you. Thank you. Appreciate your time, and feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. Love to chat.